The small town of St. Michael's Hollow was quiet, the kind of quiet that made even the wind sound like a whisper. The church stood at the center of the town like it had been watching over everything for centuries. Inside St. Michael's Catholic Church, candles flickered against the tall stone walls. It was late evening. 11 young altar boys were finishing their duties after Mass. Their laughter echoed through the empty church. At the altar stood Father Patrick Callahan, a respected priest in his late 50s. Calm voice, gentle face, a man everyone trusted. Or so they believed. Near the pews, the boys were putting away candles and books. Tommy, the youngest, looked around nervously. "Hey, why is it so dark outside already?" Michael laughed. "Because it's night, dummy." Tommy frowned. "No, I mean, it got dark fast." Daniel closed the large Bible. "Relax, it's just clouds." Across the room, Father Callahan watched them quietly, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke. "Boys." All 11 turned. "Yes, Father? I have something important to show you in the basement." Some of the boys exchanged looks. "Basement?" asked Luke. Father Callahan nodded slowly. "Yes, something sacred, something only altar boys are allowed to see." Michael grinned. "Like a secret church treasure?" Father Callahan smiled faintly. "You could say that." The boys immediately became excited. "Let's go! Come on!" Tommy hesitated. "Are we allowed down there?" Father Callahan placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Of course, my child." The priest picked up a lantern. "Follow me." The boys followed him down a narrow stone staircase behind the altar. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Dust filled the air. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling. Daniel whispered, "I've been in this church my whole life. I didn't know there was a basement." Father Callahan replied calmly, "Most people don't." At the bottom of the stairs was a long corridor. Old wooden doors lined the walls. The priest stopped at the final door. He unlocked it slowly. The door creaked open. Inside was a dark room filled with old boxes and ancient church relics. The boys looked around curiously. Michael laughed. "This is the secret?" But Father Callahan didn't laugh. Instead, he slowly closed the door behind them. Click. The sound of the lock echoed. Tommy turned. "Father, why did you lock the door?" The priest's voice changed, cold, controlled. "So no one disturbs us." The boys looked at each other, uneasy. Luke tried to joke. "Okay, Father, you're starting to scare us." Father Callahan stepped closer. His lantern light flickered across his face. "You boys were chosen." Michael frowned. "Chosen for what?" The priest's smile slowly faded. "For something greater." The lantern suddenly blew out. Darkness swallowed the room. The boys panicked. "Father, I can't see. Open the door." But the priest's voice came from somewhere in the darkness, soft, almost whispering. "Do not be afraid, children." Then came a loud metallic sound. Clang! A trapdoor slammed shut somewhere in the room. The boys screamed. Footsteps, running, shouting, "Father, please, let us out! Help!" Then silence. The next morning, the town awoke to chaos. Police cars surrounded St. Michael's Church. Parents screamed and cried. 11 altar boys, gone, without a trace. Detective Harold Briggs walked into the church with 2 officers. "Any sign of struggle?" "Nothing," an officer replied. "Doors were locked from the inside."
Briggs frowned. "What about the priest?" Another officer answered. "He says he sent the boys home after Mass." Briggs looked toward Father Callahan. The priest sat calmly on a bench, hands folded, praying. Briggs walked over. "Father Callahan?" The priest looked up gently. "Yes, officer?" "You were the last person to see the boys." "Yes." "What happened?" The priest sighed softly. "They finished their duties and left the church." Briggs narrowed his eyes. 11 boys don't just vanish into thin air. Father Callahan looked at him directly. "Sometimes evil moves in ways we cannot understand." Briggs studied his face. "You're saying something evil took them?" The priest nodded slowly. "I'm saying we should pray." Outside, the parents were crying. The search lasted weeks. Police searched the woods, the river, every building. Nothing, not a single clue. Eventually, the case became one of the most terrifying mysteries in American history. The 11 altar boys' disappearance. And Father Callahan? He remained the town's priest, respected, trusted, untouched by suspicion. But one man never believed him. Detective Harold Briggs, and he spent the rest of his life trying to prove it. But he died before he could. The truth was buried with Father Callahan, or so everyone believed. 27 years later, Washington, D.C., FBI headquarters. A young agent slammed a thick file onto a desk. "Sir, you need to see this." Senior Agent Rebecca Shaw looked up. "What is it?" "The St. Michael's case." "The missing altar boys?" "Yes." "That case is closed." "Not anymore." Rebecca opened the file. Inside were newly discovered photographs. Bones, buried deep beneath the church. 11 skeletons. Her eyes widened. Dear God! Then she saw the note attached to the evidence report. The skeletons had something strange. Every rib cage had been cut open, like something had been removed. Rebecca looked up slowly. "Where is Father Callahan buried?" The agent replied quietly. "St. Michael's Cemetery." Rebecca stood up. "Prepare an exhumation order." "Ma'am?" She closed the file slowly. "If those boys were murdered," her voice became cold, "their killer is still hiding something." The agent hesitated. "But Father Callahan died 27 years ago." Rebecca stared at the file. "Yes." Then she said something that made the room go silent. "Which means we're about to dig up a man who took the truth to his grave."
The rain was falling lightly over St. Michael's Hollow when the black FBI vehicle rolled slowly into town. It had been 27 years, yet the town still carried the shadow of what had happened. People never forgot the night the altar boys vanished. Some houses still had their photographs on the walls, smiling children who never came home. Inside the vehicle, Senior FBI Agent Rebecca Shaw stared out the window. Beside her sat Agent Daniel Ruiz, the younger agent who had reopened the case. Ruiz broke the silence. "You ever worked a case this old?" Rebecca shook her head. "No." Ruiz nodded toward the church tower visible in the distance. "Whole town still believes the priest was innocent." Rebecca replied quietly. "They always do." The car pulled to a stop near the police station. Waiting outside was Sheriff Tom Bradley, a heavy-set man in his 60s who had been a deputy during the original investigation. Rebecca stepped out and showed her badge. "Sheriff Bradley." Bradley shook her hand, but his expression was uneasy.
Never thought the FBI would come back to this case. Rebecca answered firmly. 11 murdered children tends to do that. Bradley sighed. Those boys disappearing destroyed this town. Ruiz spoke. We found bones under the church foundation during renovation work. Bradley looked shocked again, even though he had heard it earlier. Still hard to believe. Rebecca studied his face. You worked with Detective Harold Briggs back then, right? Bradley nodded slowly. He never trusted Father Callahan. Did you? Bradley hesitated. I trusted the evidence. Rebecca raised an eyebrow, and the evidence said there wasn't any. Ruiz spoke quietly, but now there is. Rebecca opened the evidence folder. Inside were photos of the skeletal remains. Bradley stared at them, his hands trembling slightly. Jesus! Rebecca pointed to one image. The rib cages were surgically opened. Bradley looked confused. You mean like an autopsy? Rebecca hesitated. No. Ruiz answered grimly, like something was taken. Bradley slowly looked up. You think the priest did that? Rebecca closed the folder. That's what we're here to find out. Bradley sighed deeply. You're not going to make friends digging into this. Rebecca replied calmly. We're not here to make friends.
That evening, the cemetery lights illuminated Father Patrick Callahan's grave. A small crowd had gathered beyond the police tape. Some townspeople watched with anger, others with fear. Rebecca stood beside the excavation crew. Sheriff Bradley walked over. You're sure you want to do this tonight? Rebecca nodded. The sooner the better. Ruiz stepped closer. You nervous? Rebecca looked at the grave. I've learned something in this job. What's that? Dead men lie less than living ones. The worker started the machine. The mechanical arm slowly pushed into the soil. Thud. Wet dirt lifted into the air. The sound of digging echoed through the quiet cemetery. Some of the townspeople whispered prayers. An older woman suddenly shouted, You leave Father Callahan alone. Another man yelled, He was a good man. Bradley turned to them. Everyone stay back. The digging continued. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, the machine hit something solid. Clunk. The operator stopped. One of the workers knelt down and brushed away the dirt. Coffin. Rebecca stepped forward. Careful. The men cleared the remaining soil until the full wooden coffin was visible. Bradley swallowed hard. Last chance to change your mind. Rebecca shook her head. Open it. The workers lifted the coffin out and placed it on the ground. Rain tapped softly against the wood. One worker grabbed a crowbar. He looked at Rebecca. You ready? Rebecca nodded. Do it. Crack. The nails pulled loose. The lid slowly opened. Everyone leaned closer. Then the worker suddenly froze. Oh my God! Rebecca stepped forward and looked inside. Her eyes widened. The coffin was empty. Ruiz stared in disbelief. That's impossible. Bradley looked pale. This grave has never been disturbed. Rebecca knelt down beside the coffin. She examined the inside. There were scratch marks along the wood, deep ones, like someone had tried to claw their way out. Ruiz whispered, Those scratches. Rebecca finished the thought. They were made from the inside. Bradley shook his head. No way. Rebecca stood slowly. Either someone stole the body, Ruiz looked around the dark cemetery, or Father Callahan didn't stay dead. Bradley rubbed his face nervously. This is insane. Rebecca pointed to the coffin lining. Look at this. Ruiz leaned closer.
The fabric inside the coffin was stained dark, but not with normal decomposition. The stains looked smeared, almost like dried blood. Ruiz swallowed. Why would a dead man bleed? Rebecca didn't answer. Instead, she pulled something small from the coffin corner, a piece of old metal. Ruiz looked at it. What is that? Rebecca wiped the dirt off. It was a small golden pendant shaped like a cross, but the cross had strange symbols carved into it. Bradley's face turned white. Rebecca noticed. You recognize it? Bradley hesitated. I saw that before. Rebecca stared at him. Where? Bradley spoke slowly. Detective Briggs found one exactly like it back in 1981. Ruiz asked, Where? Bradley's voice lowered. In the church basement. Rebecca's eyes sharpened. What happened to it? Bradley swallowed. Father Callahan told us it was part of an old religious artifact. Rebecca asked the next question quietly. And Briggs believed him? Bradley shook his head. No. What did he think it was? Bradley's voice trembled slightly. He said it looked like something used in ritual sacrifices. Ruiz stunned. Sacrifices? Bradley nodded, but the church shut the investigation down. Rebecca frowned. The church? Bradley nodded again. High officials came from the diocese. They said Briggs was disrespecting a holy man. Rebecca looked at the empty coffin again. So the investigation stopped. Yes, Ruiz spoke slowly, and now the priest's body is gone. Rebecca held the strange pendant in her hand. The real question, she looked toward the dark silhouette of St. Michael's Church, is what Father Callahan was really doing with those boys. At that moment, a cold wind passed through the cemetery. The lights flickered. One of the workers looked toward the church. Did you guys hear that? Ruiz frowned. What? The worker pointed toward the trees. I thought I heard children. Everyone went silent. For a moment, the only sound was the wind. Then, very faintly, a child's voice echoed from somewhere near the church. Help. Ruiz looked at Rebecca. You heard that too, right? Rebecca slowly closed the coffin lid. Yes. Then she said something that made everyone uneasy. Tomorrow morning, she looked directly at the church. We search the basement again.
The morning after the exhumation, a thick fog covered St. Michael's Hollow. The church stood silent, its tall stone tower disappearing into the gray sky. Police vehicles and FBI vans surrounded the building. Yellow tape stretched across the entrance. Inside the church, the air smelled old, like dust and forgotten prayers. Agent Rebecca Shaw walked slowly down the center aisle. Her footsteps echoed across the empty pews. Behind her walked Agent Daniel Ruiz and Sheriff Tom Bradley. Bradley looked uneasy. I haven't been down there since 1981. Rebecca glanced at him. You searched it during the original investigation? Bradley nodded. Every inch. Ruiz asked, and you found nothing? Bradley sighed. Nothing except old boxes and church junk. Rebecca stopped near the altar. She looked at the stone floor carefully. You searched everything, except the part no one thought to look. Ruiz frowned. What part? Rebecca pointed toward the back wall behind the altar. The foundation. Ruiz nodded slowly, where the skeletons were found. Bradley rubbed his chin. That part of the basement was sealed years ago. Rebecca looked at him. By who? Bradley hesitated. The church. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. Convenient. They walked toward a small wooden door hidden behind the altar. Bradley unlocked it with an old key. The door creaked open.
A narrow stone staircase descended into darkness. Cold air drifted up from below. Ruiz turned on his flashlight. Well, here we go again. Rebecca started down the stairs. Their footsteps echoed against the stone walls. Every step deeper made the air colder. Bradley's voice sounded nervous. This place always gave me the creeps. They reached the basement floor. The room looked exactly like Bradley described. Dusty boxes, old wooden furniture, broken religious statues. Rebecca scanned the room. Where exactly were the bones found? Ruiz pointed to the far corner, where yellow markers still covered the floor. Under the foundation, there. Rebecca walked over. The ground had already been broken open by construction workers. The hole revealed a dark cavity beneath the church floor. Rebecca crouched down and looked inside. Flashlight. Ruiz handed one to her. She shined the beam into the hole. At first, there was only dirt, then stone, then something strange. Rebecca leaned closer. Wait. Ruiz stepped beside her. What? Rebecca pointed. There's a tunnel. Ruiz's eyes widened. The flashlight revealed a narrow passageway carved through the earth beneath the church. Bradley looked stunned. That wasn't there before. Rebecca stood up. Yes, it was. Ruiz asked quietly, "You think the priest built it?" Rebecca shook her head slowly. No. She looked at the old stone walls. This tunnel is older than the church. Bradley whispered, "How old?" Rebecca answered calmly, "Very old." Ruiz grabbed a mask from his bag. Air might be bad down there. Rebecca nodded. "Let's take a look." Bradley suddenly stepped back. "Hold on." Rebecca looked at him. "You okay, Sheriff?" Bradley hesitated. "When we searched the basement in 1981, yes?"
They crawled carefully through the opening. The tunnel was narrow and damp. The smell of earth filled the air. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness. Their flashlights cut through the blackness. Ruiz whispered, "This place feels wrong." Rebecca replied calmly, "Most crime scenes do." They walked slowly deeper. The tunnel stretched farther than expected. 50 feet, then 100. Then the passage widened into a large underground chamber. The three stopped in silence. Their lights scanned the room. And then they saw it. Bradley gasped, "Oh, God!" The walls were covered in strange symbols carved into the stone, symbols that looked nothing like normal religious markings. Ruiz whispered, "What language is that?" Rebecca shook her head. "I don't know." Then the flashlight beam moved across the center of the room, and they saw the table. A large stone altar stood in the middle of the chamber. Dark stains covered its surface. Ruiz stared at it. "That's blood." Rebecca stepped closer. "It's old." Bradley looked like he might be sick. "Jesus Christ." Ruiz pointed toward the wall. "Agent Shaw, look at this." Rebecca turned. 11 small wooden crosses were nailed to the wall. Under each cross was a name carved into the stone. Tommy Reed, Michael Grant, Daniel Harper, Luke Evans. One by one, all 11 missing altar boys. Bradley's voice shook. "This can't be real." Ruiz whispered, "This was a ritual site." Rebecca's face was serious. "Yes." Ruiz looked back at the altar. "And those boys," Rebecca finished the sentence quietly, "they were sacrificed." Suddenly, Bradley turned away. "I need air." But Rebecca was staring at something else now. On the floor, beside the altar, there were deep scratch marks in the stone. Ruiz followed her gaze.
What made those? Rebecca knelt down. She touched the marks. They were claw-shaped. Ruiz whispered, "That doesn't look human." Rebecca stood slowly. Something else was here. Bradley suddenly called from the tunnel entrance, "Agents, you need to see this." Rebecca and Ruiz rushed over. Bradley's flashlight was pointed at the ground. Prints. Fresh ones. Ruiz frowned. "These weren't here yesterday." Rebecca looked carefully. The prints were barefoot, large, too large to belong to a child. Bradley whispered nervously, "If the priest's body is missing." Ruiz finished the thought slowly. "Someone's been down here recently." The tunnel behind them suddenly echoed with a distant sound, a faint dragging noise. Scrape, scrape, scrape. All three agents froze. Ruiz whispered, "Tell me that was the wind." Rebecca slowly turned toward the dark tunnel. Her voice was calm but tense. "That wasn't wind." The sound came again, closer now. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Bradley gripped his flashlight tighter. "Something's coming." Rebecca reached for her gun. Lights up. Their flashlights pointed into the darkness. The tunnel remained black, silent. Then, suddenly, a whisper echoed through the chamber. A weak child's voice. "Help us." Ruiz's eyes widened. "That's impossible." Rebecca whispered, "No, it isn't." She stared into the tunnel.
The sound in the tunnel slowly faded. For several seconds, none of them moved. The underground chamber felt colder than before. Even the air seemed heavy. Agent Daniel Ruiz finally broke the silence. "You both heard that, right?" Sheriff Tom Bradley nodded slowly. "I heard it." His voice sounded strained, but that voice, it sounded like a child. Rebecca Shaw kept her flashlight pointed into the darkness of the tunnel. Her face remained calm, but her eyes were sharp. "Sound travels strangely underground," she said quietly. Ruiz looked at her. "You think it was an echo?" Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stepped toward the wall where the 11 wooden crosses were nailed. She studied the carved names again. Each one belonged to a boy who vanished in 1981. Each one a child the town had mourned for nearly 3 decades. Rebecca spoke softly. "Someone carved these carefully." Ruiz moved closer. "You think the priest did it?" Rebecca ran her fingers across the carved letters. "No." Ruiz frowned. "Why not?" Rebecca pointed to the names. "Look at the order." Ruiz examined them. "What about it?" Rebecca explained. "They're arranged by age." Ruiz's eyes widened. Tommy Reed, 11. Michael Grant, 12. Daniel Harper, 12. Luke Evans, 13. And so on. Ruiz whispered, "Someone knew the boys very well." Sheriff Bradley looked uncomfortable. "Father Callahan knew them all." Rebecca nodded. "Yes." Then she looked toward the stone altar again. But he wasn't working alone. Ruiz turned. "What do you mean?" Rebecca pointed to the symbols carved across the walls. "These symbols are not Catholic." Bradley spoke quietly. "You think it's some kind of cult?" Rebecca replied calmly, "Possibly." Ruiz scanned the chamber again. If this place was used for rituals, then the priest must have brought the boys down here. Bradley suddenly spoke, "But that's not possible." Rebecca looked at him. "Why?" Bradley's voice was tense. "Because when the boys vanished, we searched the church that same night." Ruiz frowned. "You said that earlier." Bradley nodded. "We searched the basement, too." Rebecca crossed her arms. "And you didn't find this chamber?"
Bradley shook his head. No. Rebecca looked back at the tunnel. Then someone sealed it before you arrived. Ruiz spoke slowly, meaning whoever did this had time to hide everything. Bradley whispered, "That means we were only minutes too late." Rebecca turned toward the exit tunnel. "Let's go back upstairs." Ruiz looked surprised. "You want to leave?" Rebecca nodded. "For now." Bradley asked, "Why?" Rebecca answered calmly, "Because this chamber isn't the only secret in this case." Ruiz followed her toward the tunnel. "What else is there?" Rebecca replied without turning, "Detective Harold Briggs." Bradley froze. Ruiz looked at him. "What about him?" Rebecca climbed back through the opening into the basement. "Sheriff Bradley said something earlier that bothered me." Ruiz climbed out behind her. "What was that?" Rebecca dusted the dirt off her jacket. "Briggs never trusted Father Callahan." Bradley climbed out last. "That's true." Rebecca looked directly at him. "Which means Briggs would have kept investigating, even if the case was closed." Bradley hesitated. "He did."
Ruiz asked quickly, "What do you mean?" Bradley looked uneasy. "Briggs worked the case for years after it was shut down." Rebecca's eyes sharpened. "Did he find anything?" Bradley sighed deeply. "I don't know." Rebecca stepped closer. "You were his partner." Bradley nodded. "Yes." "Then you know something." Bradley hesitated. Finally he spoke. 2 weeks before Briggs died, he came to see me. Ruiz asked, "Died how?" "Heart attack." Rebecca studied Bradley carefully. "What did he say?" Bradley rubbed the back of his neck. "He told me he had proof." Ruiz leaned forward. "Proof of what?" Bradley answered quietly, "That Father Callahan murdered those boys." Rebecca's expression didn't change. "Did he show you anything?" Bradley shook his head. "No." Ruiz looked frustrated. "So he just told you and then died?" Bradley shook his head again. "No." Rebecca spoke. "He left something." Bradley looked surprised. "How did you know?" Rebecca gave a small smile. "Because good detectives always leave insurance." Bradley slowly nodded. "He said if anything happened to him, I should check his cabin." Ruiz asked immediately, "Did you?" Bradley shook his head. "No." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" Bradley looked ashamed. "Because the department ordered the case closed." Ruiz frowned. "So you ignored it?" Bradley didn't answer. Rebecca picked up her coat. "Where's the cabin?" Bradley sighed. "About 20 miles outside town." Rebecca started toward the basement stairs. "Then we're going." Night had already fallen by the time they reached the old road leading into the woods. Briggs's cabin stood deep in the forest. The building looked abandoned. Ruiz stepped out of the car. "This place hasn't been touched in years." Rebecca walked toward the front door. Perfect place to hide something. Bradley unlocked the door with an old spare key. The door creaked open. Dust filled the air. Flashlights illuminated the dark room. Old books, stacks of files, newspaper clippings covering the walls. Every article about the missing altar boys had been carefully pinned up. Ruiz looked amazed. Briggs never let it go. Rebecca walked slowly around the room. "No." She pointed to a large corkboard. "Look at this." Photos of Father Callahan were pinned beside strange symbols and maps of the church. Ruiz studied them. Briggs was tracking the priest. Rebecca nodded. "Yes." Bradley suddenly walked to a wooden desk in the corner. He opened a drawer. Inside was a small tape recorder. Rebecca stepped closer. "What's that?" Bradley picked it up slowly.
Briggs used this for interviews. Ruiz noticed something. There's a tape inside. Rebecca nodded. Play it. Bradley pressed the button. The tape crackled. Static filled the room. Then a voice came through the speaker. A tired voice. Detective Harold Briggs. This is Detective Harold Briggs, personal recording, October 12, 1981. Ruiz looked at Rebecca. That's 2 weeks after the boys vanished. The recording continued. I'm making this recording because if something happens to me, someone needs to know the truth. Bradley whispered, Jesus. Briggs's voice sounded shaken. I followed Father Callahan tonight. Ruiz leaned closer to the recorder. He went into the church after midnight. The tape crackled again. I watched him open the basement door and go down the stairs. Rebecca looked at Ruiz. Keep listening. Briggs's voice continued. I waited 10 minutes before following him. His breathing sounded heavy. When I got down there, the basement was empty. The tape paused briefly. Then Briggs's voice lowered. But I heard something. Ruiz whispered. What did he hear? The tape answered. Children crying. Bradley looked pale. Briggs continued. The sound was coming from beneath the floor. Rebecca's eyes hardened. He found the tunnel. The tape crackled again. I found the passage under the foundation. Ruiz whispered, just like we did. Briggs's voice grew quieter. I followed it. Static filled the room. Then Briggs spoke again. What I saw down there, I can barely describe. Bradley looked like he might be sick. The tape continued. The priest was standing in a chamber beneath the church. Rebecca stared at the recorder. He saw the ritual. Briggs's voice trembled. The boys were there. Ruiz whispered, they were alive. Briggs continued, they were tied to a stone altar. Bradley covered his mouth. Then Briggs said something that made the entire room go silent. And Father Callahan was not alone. Ruiz's voice was barely a whisper. Who else was there? The tape crackled again. Briggs spoke slowly. There were men wearing black robes. Rebecca narrowed her eyes. How many? The tape answered. At least 6. Ruiz stared at Rebecca. A cult. Briggs continued. They were chanting in a language I've never heard before. The room felt colder as the tape played. Then Briggs's voice dropped to a whisper, and something else was in that chamber. Rebecca leaned closer. What? The tape recorder suddenly hissed with static. Then Briggs's final words came through. I don't think it was human. The recording abruptly stopped. The cabin fell completely silent. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Ruiz whispered, what the hell was down there with them? Rebecca looked toward the dark forest outside the window. Her voice was calm, but chilling. I think we're about to find out.
For several seconds after the tape stopped, the cabin remained completely silent. The only sound was the faint wind moving through the trees outside. Agent Daniel Ruiz slowly leaned back in his chair. His face was pale. 6 men in robes, a ritual altar, and something that wasn't human? He looked at Rebecca Shaw. You think Briggs was telling the truth? Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Instead, she rewound the tape slightly and listened to the last part again. Briggs's frightened voice echoed through the small cabin. I don't think it was human. The tape clicked off again. Rebecca turned the recorder off. Yes, she said quietly. I think he was telling the truth.
Sheriff Tom Bradley stared at the wall where dozens of newspaper articles about the missing boys were pinned. "Briggs never lied," he said. Ruiz rubbed his forehead. "So let's say everything on that tape really happened." He looked between them. "What exactly were they doing down there?" Rebecca walked slowly across the room. She studied one of the maps Briggs had drawn of the church basement. "Ritual sacrifice." Bradley shook his head. "No priest would ever do that." Rebecca replied calmly. "Father Callahan wasn't acting like a priest." Ruiz leaned forward. "You think the church knew?" Rebecca shrugged slightly. "Maybe." She pointed to the chamber location Briggs had marked. But whatever they were doing, it happened under that church for a long time. Bradley spoke quietly, and those boys paid the price. Ruiz looked uneasy. "There's something else that bothers me." Rebecca looked at him. "What?" Ruiz leaned forward. "Briggs said the boys were alive when he saw them." Rebecca nodded. "Yes. But when we found the skeletons, the rib cages were opened." Rebecca finished his thought, meaning something was removed. Bradley whispered, "What kind of ritual needs something like that?" Rebecca answered coldly, "One meant to feed something." The room went silent again. Ruiz shook his head. "Feed what?" Rebecca looked toward the dark forest outside the cabin window. "That's what we need to find out." Later that night, 3 FBI vehicles drove back towards St. Michael's Church. The town was asleep. Street lights flickered in the fog. The church looked darker than before, almost like it was watching them return. Rebecca stepped out of the vehicle. Ruiz followed behind her, carrying equipment. Bradley looked nervous. "You're really going back down there tonight?" Rebecca replied calmly, "Yes." Bradley looked toward the church tower. "Briggs went down there once, and it scared him enough to record that tape." Rebecca replied calmly, "Briggs also said something else." Ruiz asked, "What?" Rebecca looked at him. "He said the boys were alive when he saw them." Ruiz nodded slowly. "Yes." Rebecca continued, "That means something changed after he left." Bradley frowned. "What do you mean?" Rebecca's eyes hardened. "It means whatever ritual they were doing, it wasn't finished yet."
Inside the church, the lights were off. The huge building felt empty and cold. Ruiz turned on his flashlight. "Feels different at night." Rebecca walked toward the altar. "That's because now we know what's underneath it." Bradley unlocked the basement door again. The 3 descended the staircase. The basement looked exactly as they left it. Dust, old boxes, silence. Rebecca walked to the hole in the foundation. The dark tunnel waited beneath the church floor. Ruiz switched on a stronger flashlight. "You ready?" Rebecca nodded. "Let's go." They crawled through the opening again. The tunnel swallowed the light behind them. Their footsteps echoed softly as they walked deeper. The underground chamber appeared again ahead, but something felt different. Ruiz noticed it first. "Agent Shaw." Rebecca stopped. "What?" Ruiz pointed toward the altar. "There wasn't anything on it before." Rebecca slowly walked closer. Her flashlight illuminated the surface. Something lay there now, a small object wrapped in old cloth.
Bradley whispered nervously, "Who put that there?" Rebecca carefully unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a small leather notebook, old, worn. Ruiz frowned. "What is it?" Rebecca opened it slowly. The first page had a name written across it, Detective Harold Briggs. Ruiz looked shocked. This was his? Rebecca nodded. "Looks like it." Bradley spoke quietly. "Briggs must have hidden it down here." Rebecca turned the pages. Each one was filled with detailed notes, dates, symbols, descriptions of the rituals he had secretly witnessed. Ruiz leaned closer. "What does it say?" Rebecca read aloud. "September 28th, 1981. I followed Callahan again tonight. The chanting lasted nearly an hour. The boys were brought into the chamber after midnight." Ruiz swallowed. "They really did bring them here." Rebecca kept reading. The robed men carved symbols into the walls while Callahan prepared the altar. Bradley whispered, "My God." Rebecca turned another page. Briggs had drawn the same strange symbols they saw carved into the stone. Ruiz frowned. "Those symbols are everywhere." Rebecca nodded. "They're part of whatever this ritual was." Bradley asked nervously, "What happens next?" Rebecca flipped to the final page. Her expression slowly changed. Ruiz noticed immediately. "What is it?" Rebecca read the last entry quietly. October 13th, 1981. Tonight they finished the ritual. Ruiz leaned closer. "What does that mean?" Rebecca continued reading. The boys were placed on the altar one by one. Bradley looked away. Rebecca kept reading. Callahan cut open their chests. Ruiz whispered, "That's how the rib cages were opened." Rebecca nodded. "Yes." Then she read the next line. Their hearts were removed and placed into a stone bowl. Ruiz stared at her. "Hearts?" Rebecca nodded slowly. Bradley looked sick. What kind of ritual uses children's hearts? Rebecca finished the final line of Briggs' journal. Callahan fed them to the thing beneath the altar. Ruiz looked around the chamber nervously. The thing beneath the altar? Rebecca slowly lowered the notebook. Her flashlight moved toward the altar again. She examined the base carefully. Then she noticed something, a crack in the stone floor. Ruiz followed her gaze. "What is it?" Rebecca knelt down. "There's a hidden compartment under the altar." Bradley whispered, "You're kidding." Rebecca pushed the altar slightly. It moved, heavy stone grinding against stone. The altar slid just enough to reveal a dark opening beneath it. Ruiz stepped back. That definitely wasn't open earlier. Rebecca shined her flashlight into the hole. The beam disappeared into darkness. Then she saw something at the bottom. Bones, dozens of them. Animal bones. Ruiz whispered, "Looks like something's been eating down there." Bradley stepped back nervously. "You think whatever they were feeding is still alive?" Rebecca didn't answer. Instead, she leaned closer to the opening. Suddenly, a deep sound echoed from below, a slow breathing sound. Ruiz froze. "Did you hear that?" The breathing continued, heavy, wet, like something enormous pulling air through its lungs. Bradley's voice shook. "That's not an animal." Rebecca slowly stood up. Her gun was already in her hand. "Back away from the hole." Ruiz raised his weapon too. The breathing grew louder. Something moved beneath the altar. Scrape. A clawed shape briefly appeared in the darkness. Ruiz whispered in shock, "What the hell is that?" The chamber lights flickered. Then a low growl echoed from below the stone floor. Bradley whispered in terror, "It's still here." Rebecca stared into the hole. Her voice was calm, but deadly serious. "Everyone, move." The ground suddenly shook.
Crack! The stone beneath the altar split open. Something began to crawl out of the darkness, and it was far bigger than any of them expected.
The stone beneath the altar cracked open with a loud, grinding sound. Dust and small pieces of rock fell into the dark hole. For a moment, the three of them stood frozen. The breathing from below grew louder, heavier, wet, like something enormous struggling to move after being trapped for a long time. Agent Daniel Ruiz tightened his grip on his gun. What the hell is that thing? Sheriff Tom Bradley slowly stepped backward. I don't want to find out. But Agent Rebecca Shaw did not move. Her flashlight stayed fixed on the opening beneath the altar. "Stay calm," she said quietly. The growling sound came again, lower this time, more aggressive. Then something shifted inside the darkness. Scrape, scrape. A long claw slowly appeared on the edge of the broken stone. Ruiz gasped. The claw was black, long and curved like a knife. Bradley whispered in horror, "That's not possible." The claw gripped the stone and pulled. Another claw followed. Then a shape slowly began dragging itself upward. Rebecca raised her weapon. "Back up!" Ruiz and Bradley moved toward the tunnel entrance, but they kept their flashlights on the creature. A head slowly rose from the darkness, but it was not the head of any animal they recognized. The creature's skin looked gray and stretched tight over its skull. Its eyes were sunken deep inside its face, and its mouth was filled with rows of jagged teeth. Ruiz whispered in disbelief, "Oh my God." The creature lifted itself higher. Its body was thin and twisted, almost human, but its arms were too long, and its spine bent in unnatural ways. Bradley's voice shook. "That thing has been living down there?" Rebecca answered quietly, "For decades." The creature blinked slowly. Its eyes reflected the flashlight beams. Then it opened its mouth. A terrible, broken sound came out, a sound that almost sounded like words. "Hungry." Ruiz froze. Did it just speak? The creature crawled fully out of the hole. It stood nearly 7 feet tall when it straightened. Its bones cracked loudly as it moved. Rebecca stepped forward slightly. "Stay back." The creature turned its head slowly toward her. Its nostrils flared. Then it spoke again. "Where are they?" Ruiz whispered, "Where are who?" The creature suddenly let out a terrible scream. The sound echoed through the entire chamber. Bradley covered his ears. "That thing is insane." Rebecca's voice remained calm. "No." She looked directly at the creature. "It's confused." The creature sniffed the air again. Then it looked at the wall where the 11 crosses were nailed. Its eyes suddenly widened. "Boys." Ruiz looked shocked. "It remembers them?" The creature staggered toward the wall. It touched one of the crosses with its long claw. "Gone." Its voice sounded almost sad. Rebecca spoke carefully. "Those boys died a long time ago." The creature slowly turned toward her. Its eyes burned with something that looked like rage. "Priest." Ruiz whispered, "It's asking about Callahan." Rebecca nodded slowly. "Yes." She spoke loudly enough for the creature to hear. "Father Callahan is dead." The creature froze. "Dead." Rebecca nodded. "Yes." The creature stared at her for several seconds. Then its entire body began to shake. Its claws dug into the stone floor. "Liar." Suddenly it roared with terrifying fury. The sound shook the chamber walls. Ruiz stepped back. "That thing is about to attack."
Rebecca raised her gun. "Hold your fire unless it charges." The creature slammed its claws into the altar. Stone shattered under the force. Bradley shouted, "That thing can tear us apart!" The creature began pacing across the chamber like a wild animal. Its breathing became faster, more aggressive. More children. Ruiz felt a chill run through his body. Oh no. Rebecca realized it in the same moment. If it leaves this chamber, Bradley finished the sentence, it'll go into the town. The creature suddenly rushed toward the tunnel entrance. Rebecca shouted, "Stop!" She fired a shot. Bang! The bullet hit the creature's shoulder, but it barely slowed down. Ruiz fired twice. Bang! Bang! The creature screamed but continued crawling through the tunnel. Bradley shouted, "It's heading for the church!" Rebecca ran after it. "Move!"
They raced through the tunnel behind the creature. The sound of its claws scraping against stone echoed ahead. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Ruiz shouted while running. "That thing is fast!" Rebecca replied. "Don't let it reach the stairs." But they were too late. When they climbed back into the basement, the creature was already there. It stood near the staircase, looking upward toward the church above. Bradley whispered, "If it gets upstairs." Rebecca raised her weapon again. "Then we stop it here." The creature slowly turned toward them. Blood from the gunshot wounds dripped onto the floor. But it looked stronger now, almost energized. "More," Ruiz whispered. "It's getting stronger." Rebecca realized why. The ritual chamber. Ruiz frowned. "What about it?" Rebecca answered grimly. "That place was feeding it." The creature suddenly lunged forward. Its claws slammed into a wooden table, splitting it in half. Bradley fired his shotgun. Boom! The blast knocked the creature backward, but it quickly rose again. Rebecca shouted, "Aim for the head!" Gunfire filled the basement. Bang! Bang! Boom! The creature screamed in rage, but it kept moving. Closer, closer. Ruiz backed toward the stairs. "We can't stop it." Rebecca's mind raced. Then she remembered Briggs' journal. "The ritual!" Ruiz shouted, "What about it?" Rebecca looked toward the hole in the foundation. That creature was tied to the ritual chamber. Ruiz understood instantly. "If we trap it down there," Rebecca nodded, "it might weaken again." Bradley shouted, "Then get it back in the tunnel." The creature suddenly jumped forward. Rebecca fired again. Bang! The bullet struck its head, staggering it. Rebecca shouted, "Now!" They retreated toward the tunnel opening. The creature followed them with furious speed, roaring, screaming, its claws tearing chunks from the stone walls. As they reached the tunnel entrance, Rebecca looked at Ruiz. "You ready?" Ruiz nodded nervously. "No, but let's do it." They jumped into the tunnel. The creature crawled after them, exactly where they wanted it. Rebecca whispered while running, "When it reaches the chamber," Ruiz finished, "we collapse the entrance." The creature roared behind them. The hunt had begun, and only one side would leave the tunnels alive. The narrow tunnel echoed with the sound of running footsteps. Stone walls rushed past as Rebecca Shaw, Daniel Ruiz, and Sheriff Tom Bradley raced deeper beneath the church. Behind them, the creature was coming. Fast. The sound of its claws scraping against the tunnel floor grew louder with every second. Scrape, scrape, scrape. Ruiz looked back over his shoulder. His flashlight beam caught a glimpse of the creature crawling through the darkness. Its long limbs twisted unnaturally as it chased them. "Move!" Ruiz shouted. They burst back into the underground chamber. The strange ritual symbols still covered the walls. The stone altar had been pushed aside, leaving the dark hole beneath it open. Rebecca quickly turned toward the tunnel entrance. "Get ready!" Bradley moved beside her with his shotgun. Ruiz grabbed a heavy wooden support beam lying near the wall. "What's the plan?" Rebecca spoke quickly. "When it comes through that tunnel, we force it toward the altar pit." Bradley nodded. "And then," Rebecca answered grimly, "then we bury it." Ruiz whispered nervously, "You make that sound easy." The creature's roar echoed through the tunnel. It was almost there. Rebecca raised her gun. "Positions!" They spread out around the chamber. Ruiz stood near the altar pit. Bradley stood near the tunnel entrance. Rebecca waited in the center of the room. The scraping sound grew louder. Then, suddenly, the creature burst into the chamber. It crawled across the stone floor like a spider. Its eyes glowed in the flashlight beams. Rebecca fired immediately. Bang! The bullet struck the creature's chest. It screamed, but kept moving. Bradley fired his shotgun. Boom! The blast slammed the creature sideways into the wall. Stone cracked under the impact. Ruiz shouted, "Over here!" He kicked a broken piece of wood across the floor, drawing the creature's attention. The creature turned toward Ruiz. Its mouth opened wide. Rows of sharp teeth gleamed in the light. It rushed toward Ruiz. Rebecca fired again. Bang! The bullet hit its shoulder. The creature staggered, but continued forward. Ruiz stepped backward toward the altar pit. "Come on! Come on!" The creature lunged. Ruiz jumped aside at the last second. The creature nearly fell into the open hole beneath the altar, but it caught the edge with its claws. Rebecca ran forward. "Now!" Bradley grabbed the heavy altar stone. Together they pushed with all their strength. The altar slid across the floor again, grinding loudly. The creature roared. Its claws dug into the stone floor as it tried to climb out. Rebecca shouted, "Push!" The altar slammed over the opening. The creature's arm was still sticking out. Its clawed fingers clawed at the air. Bradley brought the shotgun down hard. Crack! The creature's hand disappeared beneath the stone. A horrible scream echoed through the chamber. Then the altar settled back into place. Silence returned. Heavy silence. Ruiz leaned against the wall, breathing hard. "Tell me that worked." Rebecca listened carefully. For several seconds there was no sound from beneath the altar. Then, faintly, very faintly, the creature's breathing continued, but it sounded weaker now. Bradley wiped sweat from his face. "It's trapped again." Rebecca nodded slowly. "For now." Ruiz looked around the chamber. "Then what do we do?" Rebecca glanced at the strange symbols carved into the walls. "We finish what Briggs started." Ruiz frowned. "You mean destroying this place?" Rebecca nodded. "Yes." Bradley agreed. "This chamber shouldn't exist." Rebecca pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the FBI explosives unit." Ruiz's eyes widened. "You're going to blow up the church?" Rebecca answered calmly. "I'm going to collapse the tunnels." Bradley nodded. That would bury the creature for good. But before Rebecca could make the call, a voice echoed through the chamber. A calm voice, a familiar voice. "Burying the truth never works." All three of them froze. Ruiz slowly turned. "Did you hear that?" Rebecca did not move. "Yes." Bradley whispered, "That voice." The voice came again from the darkness near the tunnel. "You should not have come here." Ruiz raised his flashlight toward the tunnel entrance. The beam cut through the darkness and revealed a man there, wearing a black coat, his face pale, his hair thin and gray. Bradley's jaw dropped. "That's impossible." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "Father Callahan." The priest stepped into the light.
his expression calm, almost peaceful, just like the photographs from 27 years ago. Ruiz whispered, "But you were exhumed your grave." Callahan smiled faintly. "Yes." Bradley stammered, "But the coffin was empty." Callahan nodded slowly. "Of course it was." Rebecca raised her gun. "You're supposed to be dead." Callahan folded his hands calmly. "I was." Ruiz stared at him. "You're saying you came back from the dead?" Callahan chuckled softly. "No, Agent Ruiz." He looked toward the altar. "I was reborn." Rebecca kept her weapon trained on him. "What are you talking about?" Callahan walked slowly into the chamber. His eyes briefly glanced at the altar stone covering the pit. "You woke it." Rebecca said coldly, "You fed it children." Callahan shook his head gently. "No." Ruiz shouted angrily, 11 boys died because of you." Callahan's expression did not change. "They were chosen." Bradley shouted, "They were murdered." Callahan looked at him calmly. "Sacrifice is not murder." Rebecca spoke firmly, "You're under arrest." Callahan laughed quietly. "You still don't understand." Rebecca stepped forward. "Then explain it." Callahan pointed toward the altar. "The creature beneath that stone," he paused, "is older than your civilization." Ruiz whispered, "What is it?" Callahan smiled. "A guardian." Bradley scoffed, "That thing is a monster." Callahan shook his head gently. "No." Rebecca narrowed her eyes. "What does it protect?" Callahan looked her directly. "The gate." Ruiz frowned. "What gate?" Callahan pointed at the floor beneath the altar. "The gate beneath the earth." Rebecca's voice hardened. "You expect us to believe that?" Callahan nodded calmly. "Yes." Ruiz whispered, "A gate to where?" Callahan's smile slowly widened. "To where the real darkness lives." The creature beneath the altar suddenly roared again. The stone shifted slightly. Rebecca realized something. "You're trying to release it." Callahan nodded. "Of course." Bradley raised his shotgun. "You're insane." Callahan's voice became serious. "No." He looked directly at Rebecca. "I'm finishing the ritual." Ruiz's frown froze. "What ritual?" Callahan pointed toward them. "The final sacrifice." Rebecca's eyes widened. Then the stone altar suddenly cracked again. The creature beneath it screamed with renewed strength.
The underground chamber trembled as cracks spread across the stone floor. Dust fell from the ceiling. The altar that sealed the pit began to shift again. Agent Rebecca Shaw kept her gun pointed at Father Callahan, but her eyes kept moving toward the altar. Something beneath it was pushing upward, hard, violently. Daniel Ruiz shouted over the noise, "You need to stop whatever you're doing." Father Callahan stood calmly in the center of the chamber, his hands slowly raised as if he were welcoming the chaos. "I am not doing anything, Agent Ruiz." He smiled faintly. "You are." Sheriff Tom Bradley tightened his grip on the shotgun. "The creature was trapped." Callahan shook his head. "No." His voice remained calm and steady. "It was waiting." Rebecca spoke sharply. "For what?" Callahan slowly looked at the three of them. "For the final offering." Ruiz stepped closer. "You mean us?" Callahan tilted his head slightly. "You came willingly." Rebecca's voice hardened. "Don't move." But Callahan didn't look afraid. Instead, he looked proud. "The ritual was never completed in 1981, he said. Bradley shouted, 11 children died. Callahan nodded slowly. Yes, but the gate required 12. The words hit the chamber like a thunderclap. Ruiz stared at him. 12? Rebecca's eyes narrowed. You needed one more sacrifice. Callahan smiled faintly. And now you understand. The ground shook again. Crack! The stone altar split down the middle. A claw burst through the crack, then another. The creature was trying to break free. Ruiz shouted, "It's coming out!" Callahan raised his voice slightly. "It senses the offering." Rebecca fired a warning shot. Bang! "Stay where you are!" Callahan didn't even flinch. "You still believe bullets will stop what is coming." The chamber shook again. The altar stone lifted slightly from below. Something massive was pushing upward. Bradley shouted, "Everyone back!" They stepped away as the altar suddenly exploded upward. Boom! Stone fragments flew across the chamber. The creature burst free again, but something about it had changed. Its body looked stronger now, its skin darker, its movements faster. Ruiz whispered in horror, "It's getting stronger." Callahan nodded proudly. Yes. The creature slowly stood up, its long limbs stretched as its bones cracked loudly. Its eyes glowed in the dim light. Then it looked toward Callahan. "Master." Rebecca froze. It recognizes him. Callahan stepped forward calmly. "My faithful guardian." The creature knelt slightly before him, like a servant. Bradley whispered, "That thing obeys him." Callahan placed his hand gently on the creature's head. "You have waited long enough." The creature's voice sounded broken but eager. "Gate, open?" Callahan nodded slowly. "Yes." Ruiz raised his gun again. "Don't move." Callahan ignored him. He pointed toward the center of the chamber floor. "Break the seal." The creature turned. It slammed its claws into the stone floor. Crack! The ground split open. Rebecca shouted, "Stop it!" She fired again. Bang! The bullet struck the creature's neck, but the creature didn't stop. It slammed the ground again. Boom! A huge crack opened across the chamber floor. A dark red glow began rising from beneath the earth. Ruiz stepped back. "What is that?" Rebecca whispered. "Something buried deep." Callahan's voice echoed proudly. "The gate awakens." The crack widened further. The red light grew brighter. Heat rushed upward from the opening. Bradley wiped sweat from his face. "It's getting hot in here." Callahan spread his arms. "For thousands of years, this gate has remained sealed." Rebecca shouted, "Sealed for a reason." Callahan's smile widened. "Yes." His eyes gleamed with madness, "because the world above was not ready." Ruiz shouted, "Ready for what?" Callahan looked down into the glowing crack. "For the ones who wait below." The creature slammed the floor again. Boom! The crack widened into a large pit. Inside the pit, something moved, something enormous. A deep rumbling sound echoed upward. Bradley whispered, "Please tell me that's not what I think it is." Rebecca's voice was tense. "That's something much bigger than the creature." Ruiz asked quietly, "What could be bigger?" Callahan answered, "The first guardian." Ruiz stared at him. "First?" Callahan nodded. "The one you saw beneath the altar was only the keeper of the gate." Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. "You're saying there are more?" Callahan smiled. "Oh yes." The red glow from the pit suddenly pulsed brighter. A deep voice echoed from the darkness below, a voice so low it felt like it vibrated through their bones. "Who wakes us?" Bradley nearly dropped the shotgun. "Did you hear that?" Rebecca stepped back slowly.
Yes, Ruiz whispered. That voice came from down there. Callahan bowed his head toward the pit. My lord. The deep voice rumbled again. The offering. Callahan pointed toward the agents. They stand before you. Ruiz shouted, No way! Rebecca grabbed Ruiz's arm. We're leaving. But the creature blocked the tunnel entrance. Its claws scraped against the stone floor. Callahan spoke calmly. You cannot leave. Rebecca's voice hardened. Watch us. She fired 3 quick shots. Bang! 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 The creature screamed but remained standing. Callahan sighed. You are delaying the inevitable. The red glow from the pit intensified. A massive shadow moved beneath the earth. The deep voice spoke again. The gate must open. Callahan nodded eagerly. Yes. Rebecca realized something. The ritual requires blood. Ruiz looked at her. What? Rebecca pointed to the symbols carved on the walls. Those symbols, they form a circle. Ruiz followed her finger. The entire chamber floor was marked with ritual carvings, and they were standing inside the circle. Bradley whispered, We're part of the ritual. Callahan nodded. Exactly. Ruiz shouted, You're insane! Callahan's smile faded slightly. No. He looked toward the pit. I am chosen. Suddenly, the creature lunged toward Ruiz. Rebecca fired again. Bang! The creature slammed Ruiz against the wall. His gun fell to the floor. Rebecca shouted, Ruiz! The creature raised its claw, ready to strike. Rebecca ran forward and slammed into it. The two crashed against the altar remains. Bradley fired his shotgun again. Boom! The blast knocked the creature backward. Ruiz grabbed his gun and rolled away. Rebecca looked toward the pit. The shadow inside it was rising, slowly. Something enormous was climbing toward the surface. Callahan's voice trembled with excitement. Yes. The deep voice from below spoke again. The gate opens. The chamber began shaking violently. Stone cracked across the walls. Ruiz shouted, We need to collapse this place. Rebecca nodded. Explosives. Bradley shouted, The FBI truck! Rebecca looked toward the tunnel entrance, but the creature blocked the path again. Its wounds were healing. Callahan whispered proudly, The guardian grows stronger the closer the gate opens. Rebecca raised her gun again. Then we shut the gate first. The shadow inside the pit rose higher. A massive shape began emerging from the darkness, something far larger than the creature. Ruiz whispered in terror, Oh God! Callahan smiled. You are about to witness the rebirth of the world. Rebecca fired at Callahan. Bang! But Callahan suddenly stepped aside. The bullet struck the wall. He laughed softly. You are too late. The shadow in the pit suddenly opened 2 enormous glowing eyes. The chamber filled with a deafening roar, and the gate beneath the church finally began to open.
The chamber exploded with sound. A roar unlike anything human echoed up from the pit. The ground shook violently as the massive shadow beneath the earth continued rising. Stone blocks fell from the ceiling. Dust filled the air. The glowing red light from the pit grew brighter, casting terrifying shadows across the chamber walls. Agent Rebecca Shaw grabbed Daniel Ruiz by the arm and pulled him away from the edge. Stay back! Ruiz looked down into the pit. His voice shook. That thing is enormous. Something was climbing upward, slow, heavy. Every movement caused the ground to tremble. Beside them, Sheriff Tom Bradley stared in horror. We can't let that thing come out. Across the chamber, Father Callahan stood with his arms raised, his face glowing in the red light. His voice echoed proudly. The gate opens at last. Rebecca pointed her gun at him. End it now. Callahan slowly turned toward her. End it? He smiled. "You have no idea what you are witnessing." Ruiz shouted, "Whatever that thing is, it stays down there." Callahan laughed softly. "You believe the world above deserves to continue as it is?" Rebecca's voice was cold. "Yes." Callahan shook his head. "The world above is corrupt, weak, blind." The pit rumbled again. The creature they had trapped earlier moved beside Callahan like a loyal servant. It looked down into the glowing pit eagerly. "Master rises." Bradley whispered, "That thing worships whatever's down there." Callahan nodded proudly. "Of course it does." The ground cracked again. A massive claw rose from the pit. But this claw was far larger than the creature's. It was the size of a car, covered in thick black skin that glowed faintly from the red light below. Ruiz whispered in terror, "That's not a creature." Rebecca finished the thought, "That's something ancient." The claw gripped the edge of the pit. Then a second claw appeared. Stone shattered as the massive being began pulling itself upward. Callahan knelt before the pit. "My lord, the final sacrifice awaits." Rebecca fired. Bang! The bullet struck Callahan in the shoulder. He fell backward. Ruiz shouted, "Nice shot!" But Callahan began laughing even while bleeding. "You still don't understand." Rebecca walked toward him carefully, gun raised. "You're finished." Callahan smiled up at her. "No." He slowly pointed toward the chamber floor. "You are." Rebecca suddenly realized something. The ritual symbols on the floor were glowing faintly. Ruiz noticed it too. "The symbols, they're lighting up." Bradley whispered, "That's not good." Callahan laughed. "The gate feeds on life." Rebecca grabbed Ruiz. "Get out of the circle." They jumped away from the center of the chamber, but the creature suddenly lunged forward. Its claws blocked the tunnel exit again. Callahan spoke weakly but proudly, "You cannot escape." The giant shadow from the pit rose higher. A huge horned head began appearing from the darkness below. Two glowing eyes stared into the chamber. Ruiz nearly dropped his gun. "That thing is bigger than a truck." Rebecca's voice was tense. "We don't have time." She turned toward Bradley. "Where are the explosives?" Bradley answered quickly, "In the truck outside." Rebecca looked at the tunnel. "We need them now." The creature roared and slammed its claws into the ground. Stone shattered again. Callahan shouted, "The gate must open!" The giant creature from the pit began pushing itself upward. Half its body was now visible. Huge wings folded behind its back. Its skin looked like molten stone. Ruiz whispered in terror, "That's not a creature." Rebecca finished, "That's a demon." The massive being looked around the chamber slowly. Its deep voice echoed again, "Who calls us?" Callahan crawled toward the pit. "I do, my lord." Rebecca ran forward, but the smaller creature blocked her path again. She fired. Bang! Bang! The bullet slowed it, but didn't stop it. Bradley fired the shotgun. Boom! The blast knocked the creature aside for a moment. Rebecca rushed forward and grabbed Callahan by the collar. "You're ending this!" Callahan smiled through the pain. "You can't." Rebecca pressed the gun against his head. "Watch me." But Callahan whispered something strange, words in the same ancient language carved on the walls. The symbols on the floor suddenly flared red. Ruiz shouted, "The ritual is activating!" The giant demon began climbing out faster now. Its huge wings unfolded slightly. The chamber ceiling cracked. Bradley shouted, "If that thing gets out," Rebecca finished, "the whole town dies." Ruiz shouted, "We need explosives now." Rebecca looked at Bradley. "You and Ruiz go." Bradley hesitated. "What about you?"
Rebecca looked at Callahan. "I'll keep him from finishing the ritual." Ruiz grabbed Bradley. "Come on!" They ran toward the tunnel. The creature tried to stop them, but Rebecca fired again, forcing it back. Ruiz and Bradley disappeared into the tunnel. Rebecca dragged Callahan away from the pit. "You're done." Callahan laughed weakly. "No, the gate is already open." Rebecca looked down into the pit. The giant demon was nearly free now. Its huge wings scraped the chamber walls. Its eyes locked onto Rebecca. A new offering. Rebecca felt the heat from its breath. Callahan whispered beside her, "You see now." Rebecca said nothing. She only tightened her grip on her gun. Callahan spoke softly, "The world will burn tonight." Rebecca finally answered, "No." Callahan smiled, "Then stop it." Rebecca looked toward the tunnel where Ruiz and Bradley had gone. "They will." The giant demon climbed higher. Its massive body was nearly filling the chamber now. Its claws reached toward the surface. The creature servant stood beside Callahan protectively. Callahan whispered proudly, "The age of darkness returns." Rebecca stared at him coldly. "We'll see." The chamber shook again, and the giant demon's massive head finally rose fully out of the pit.
The chamber beneath St. Michael's Church shook like the earth itself was breaking apart. Stone blocks crashed from the ceiling. Dust filled the air so thick it was hard to breathe. The enormous creature from the pit kept rising. Its massive body forced its way upward through the cracked stone, like something ancient returning to the world after centuries of imprisonment. Agent Rebecca Shaw stood near the edge of the glowing pit, her gun raised, her eyes locked on the monster climbing out of the darkness. The heat coming from the pit felt like standing next to a furnace. Behind her, Father Patrick Callahan struggled to stand despite the bullet wound in his shoulder. But even injured, he was smiling. A proud smile, a victorious smile. "You see now," Callahan said weakly. Rebecca didn't look at him. "I see a monster." Callahan shook his head. "No." His eyes gleamed as he stared at the rising demon. "You see a new beginning." The demon's massive horns pushed through the cracked floor stone. Its enormous wings unfolded slowly, tearing apart pieces of the chamber wall. The smaller creature, the guardian, knelt beside the pit like a servant awaiting its master. "The gate opens," it whispered. Rebecca took a step backward. The chamber was barely holding together now. If that demon got free, nothing would stop it from reaching the surface. And if it reached the surface, the entire town would die, maybe more. Callahan slowly stood behind her. "The world above has forgotten fear," he said quietly. Rebecca turned and slammed him against the wall. "You murdered children." Callahan's eyes stayed calm. "They were necessary." Rebecca pressed the gun harder against his forehead. "Say that again." Callahan looked directly at her. "They were necessary." Rebecca's finger tightened on the trigger. But before she could fire, a thunderous roar exploded from the pit. The demon's massive head lifted higher, its glowing eyes locked onto Rebecca. "Blood." Its voice shook the chamber walls. "The gate demands blood." Callahan laughed weakly. "You see, it recognizes the offering." Rebecca shoved him to the ground. "You're insane." Callahan shook his head slowly. "No." He pointed toward the ritual symbols glowing across the chamber floor. "The ritual circle is complete." Rebecca glanced down.
The symbols were burning bright red now, forming a perfect circle around the pit, and she realized something terrifying. They were inside it. Suddenly, the demon's giant claw slammed onto the stone floor. Boom! The impact knocked Rebecca backward. The guardian creature rushed toward her, its claws raised high. Before it could strike, boom! A shotgun blast echoed through the chamber. The creature screamed as the blast tore into its back. Rebecca turned. Sheriff Tom Bradley stood in the tunnel entrance with the shotgun. Beside him, Daniel Ruiz was dragging a heavy military bag. "We got the explosives," Ruiz shouted. Rebecca jumped to her feet. Perfect timing. The demon roared again. Its massive body continued rising from the pit. The chamber ceiling cracked loudly. Bradley looked up in horror. "If that thing spreads those wings," Ruiz finished the sentence, "the whole town is finished." Rebecca grabbed the explosives bag from Ruiz. "How many charges?" "Enough to collapse this entire tunnel system." Rebecca nodded. "That's exactly what we need." Callahan began laughing again from the floor. "You still don't understand." Rebecca ignored him. She began setting explosive charges along the cracked stone walls. Ruiz helped quickly. Bradley kept firing at the guardian creature whenever it tried to attack. Boom! Boom! Each shotgun blast forced it back temporarily, but the creature kept coming. The demon rose higher. Now nearly its entire upper body was above the pit. Its wings scraped the ceiling. Stone shattered everywhere. "The gate opens," it rumbled. Rebecca shouted to Ruiz. "Charges set?" "Almost." Callahan slowly crawled toward the glowing pit again. Rebecca noticed. "Stop him!" Ruiz ran and kicked Callahan away from the edge. "You're done!" But Callahan grabbed Ruiz's leg. "The ritual must be finished!" Ruiz punched him hard across the face. "Not today." The guardian creature suddenly lunged again. Bradley fired. Boom! But this time the blast didn't stop it. The creature slammed Bradley into the wall. His shotgun flew across the floor. Rebecca grabbed her pistol. Bang, bang, bang! 3 bullets struck the creature's chest. It turned toward her with rage. Then the demon spoke again. "The sacrifice." The creature paused. Its glowing eyes turned toward Callahan. Callahan slowly smiled. "My lord." The creature walked toward him. Rebecca realized something too late. "Wait!" The creature grabbed Callahan by the throat and lifted him off the ground. Callahan didn't struggle. He looked almost honored. "My lord, I served you faithfully." The demon's voice echoed. "The final offering." Then the creature ripped Callahan's chest open with its claws. Blood splashed across the stone floor. Callahan gasped once, then went silent. The demon inhaled deeply. "The gate feeds." Rebecca stared in shock. "It sacrificed him," Ruiz whispered. "The priest became the final offering." But the demon began rising even faster now. Its strength had returned. Bradley shouted, "Agent Shaw, charges!" Rebecca snapped back to reality. She grabbed the detonator. "All charges set." Ruiz looked around the collapsing chamber. "We need to go now." The demon roared. Its massive wings began spreading wider. Rebecca knew if it got free, it would reach the surface in seconds. She looked at the detonator, then at the tunnel, then at the demon, and made the decision. "Run!" They sprinted toward the tunnel entrance. The guardian creature tried to stop them again, but Bradley grabbed his shotgun from the floor. Boom!
The blast knocked it into the pit beside its master. Rebecca, Ruiz and Bradley ran through the tunnel as the chamber behind them shook violently. The demon roared in fury. "You cannot stop what has begun." Rebecca reached the tunnel exit. Ruiz and Bradley climbed through the basement opening. Rebecca looked back one last time. The demon's burning eyes were staring directly at her through the tunnel. She pressed the detonator. Click. A chain of explosions erupted beneath the church. Boom, boom, boom. The tunnel collapsed behind them. Stone and earth crashed down. The entire church floor shook violently. Rebecca ran up the basement stairs as the ground collapsed below. Ruiz and Bradley burst out the front doors. The three of them ran across the churchyard. Then, the ground beneath the church collapsed entirely. The massive stone building fell inward as the earth swallowed it. A cloud of dust rose into the night sky. The explosions finally stopped. Silence returned. Rebecca slowly turned back toward where the church once stood. Now there was only a giant crater in the earth. Ruiz breathed heavily. "Tell me that worked." Bradley stared into the darkness. "I hope so." For several seconds, nothing moved. Then, deep beneath the rubble, a faint rumble echoed. Rebecca looked down at the crater. Her expression was calm but serious. "If that gate ever opens again," Ruiz finished quietly, "someone else will have to close it." The wind blew across the empty crater, and far below the collapsed earth, something moved very slowly, and the screen fades to black.